organization, acTVism Munich, was built on the criticisms that you expressed in Manufacturing Consent. We strive to develop a media outlet that is independent, non-profit, grassroots, that does not take money from advertisements, corporations, or governments. How important is it for people to support independent and grassroots media in this day and age?
That's not only important, but it's essential if we're going to survive. I mean, just remember what the neoliberal policies of the past 40 years have been. I gave the rough estimate for the United States, stealing $50 trillion from working people and the middle class to enrich the ultra-rich and the corporate sector. Well, that goes on, and of course much else, like climate denialism under the impact of the banks, the fossil fuel industries, so on. They say, let's make as much money as we can, and who cares what happens? Well, that's a recipe for total disaster, species annihilation. If all of that isn't changed, and soon, there isn't going to be anything else to talk about. It'll be over, literally over. That's if we don't get nuclear war first. And it's very dangerous. I'm just repeating what the doomsday clock analysts repeated, and every sensible analyst knows. If you look at current policy, it's astonishing. So it's easy to think, take Ukraine again. It's very easy to think of scenarios that could lead on to nuclear war. So far, Russia has not attacked supply lines, the supply lines that are bringing in massive supplies to Ukraine. Actually, Western analysts have wondered why they're not doing it. Well, sooner or later, they might do it. In that case, they run into a conflict with NATO. At that point, your imagination can move very quickly up the escalation ladder. Let's take another case. There's a tremendous problem of starvation all over the world caused by the closing off of one of the major sources of grain, fertilizer, and so on, the Black Sea region. Well, there's a Russian blockade. Again, there are two ways to deal with that. One way is violence, what comes naturally to the United States and its allies. The other way is negotiation and diplomacy. Well, what do we see? 100% talk about escalating violence. So the Wall Street Journal, major business journal, just had a major editorial in which they said the United States Navy should break the blockade. Okay, what happens when the US Navy starts confronting Russian ships? Do the Russians say, oh, that was pleasant, why don't you sink our fleet? Not very likely. So you may not like it, but you have to recognize the real world. And the business community, the Wall Street Journal, apparently can't. Fortunately, the Pentagon can, so it blocks these efforts. They're the peacekeeping force in the United States at this point, literally. Take another proposal is send sophisticated, advanced anti-ship weapons to sink the Russian fleet. They already managed to sink the flagship, so let's go on. Again, what happens? Does Russia react? Well, if it does, we're finished. You know? There's even leading figures like Hillary Clinton, for example, or lots of people in Congress who say we should impose a no-fly zone. That sounds nice. Again, the Pentagon blocked it because the Pentagon understands what the heroic posturers don't understand. Namely, if you want to have a no-fly zone, you have to have control of the air. Control of the air means you attack and destroy Russian anti-aircraft installations which are inside Russia. Then what happens? Well, if you want to make fancy speeches, fine, nothing will happen. If you think about the likely future, what will happen is we're finished. Okay? This is going on all over. It's beyond belief. The mainstream media are an ideological instrument. They have owners, they have commitments, they have advertising support, and so on. They're very valuable. I mean, I read them all the time. I'm glad they're there, but we shouldn't have any illusions. They're not coming from Mars. They are based on existing institutions of power and domination within our societies. And that affects what they choose to discuss at all, some things they don't discuss, and the ways in which they do it. It would be almost a miracle if that weren't true. And when they condemn actions like these, that should be taken as praise. Say we're doing the right thing. If these institutions condemn us, that's pretty good reason to think we're doing the right thing. It happens to be counter to their particular interests, but they don't represent the public interest. They represent certain special interests of power and domination and privilege. So if they don't like what we're doing, fine, let's continue. And it is the right thing to do, at least if you care about the survival of the species. And that's what's at stake. We should recognize that in the case of nuclear weapons, as well as environmental catastrophe, we're really talking about survival of the species. In the case of nuclear weapons, literal survival. And again, I repeat, it's come very close in the past. And there's no reason to think that's not going to repeat.
Noam Chomsky, anarchist, political philosopher, a linguist, and political commentator. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
These are the building blocks that make up our organization and the goals we would like to achieve. In order to continue our journalism and realize these values fundamental to our democracy, we need 1,000 supporters in our crowdfunding campaign, donating only €5 or dollars per month via Patreon or bank account. Right now, we have only 200 supporters and are not able to take the next step. Our future is in your hands. Strengthen independent journalism and be part of meaningful change.